Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 595 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our sixth book just came out. It's called I'm So Beautiful, It's Ridiculous. Unleashing and Promoting Strength, Self-Worth, and Real Sisterhood. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, our next guest and I, we were both doing our dissertation right about the same time, both on hazing prevention. So you better believe that I was watching her journey and cheering her on and being a part of that dissertation defense because I tell you what, you have got to read her dissertation. It is incredible work. It is incredible research. And you can actually go down to the show notes right now and click on that link and download her dissertation. I promise you, you will absolutely love it. So please go and check that out and share that as much as you can. So our next guest is Dr. Akeya Simeon. She is the Director of Fraternity and Sorority Life at the University of South Florida. Dr. Simeon brings a wealth of experience as a scholar, activist, a higher education leader, and a social work educator. She most recently served as the Assistant Director for Fraternity and Sorority Life at West Virginia University, where she also taught in the School of Social Work and earned her PhD in higher education. She is passionate about hazing prevention, student development, and creating empowering spaces. Welcome to the show, Dr. Simeon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I have been waiting a very, very long time to have you on the show. So I am super excited to have you on to talk about your hazing research. But before we even get to that, I'm wondering, you describe yourself as an unapologetically student-centered, justice-driven leader. I'm fascinated by all of it. What experiences have shaped that identity for you within higher education?
I would say it's been a myriad of experiences, right, and identities that I hold, and not just my lived experiences, but like my educational experiences as well. So I've navigated higher education as a first gen student. I've navigated as a Black woman, a single mother. So when I started my doctoral journey, I was a single mother. I hadn't yet met my husband yet. And now I'm a wife and a professional who has earned the coveted 1%, right? The doctor, like I am now a doctor. I've also worked in a multitude of different settings, public, private, not just in higher ed, but as a social worker. I worked in the public sector for many years doing disability rights work for students, advocating for families who didn't have equitable access to healthcare, food, schooling for their children that were in early Head Start. But at the center of all of that, really, what has reaffirmed that background for me is like everybody has a marginalized identity. Whether you're Black, white, Hispanic, whatever your identity and background is, every one of us holds some type of marginalization that can be used against us to keep us from elevating. And so one of the things I've always done is I've asked hard questions about removing systemic barriers. And I've always been unapologetic about it. I've been told throughout my career, you need to be more diplomatic, you need to be sweeter, kinder, softer. I was raised by a single mother. None of those things are me. I don't have the luxury, especially as a Black woman and a Black PhD holding woman in higher education. I don't have that luxury to do that. I don't. And working with the different areas I've worked in, especially for my students, I think people often forget without students, there is no higher education. Who are we teaching? Who are we doing research for? And so often it's like we want to, not really keep them at the center. It's, oh, we have the students, but we have all these other things going on. But without the students, we don't have jobs. We don't have career paths. There are no programmatic, there is no student development, there's no student affairs, no student life. And academics are going to hate me for saying this, but you don't have any academy without a student. And so that's why I'm so unapologetically student centered. And I'm always going to be rooted in the center of students, which, for my future career as university president might not make me so popular with faculty, but again, you can't be faculty, staff, or anything without the students. So that's exactly where that student centered ideology and just rootedness in my practice comes from.
Amen. I love all of it. And I love your background in social work. I'm wondering, how does that social work background influence the way that you approach leadership in fraternity and sorority life?
It's definitely the cornerstone to how I interact with my students, how I
Mm.
help develop them and lead them. In social work, we're taught to see systems, not symptoms. So I'm taught to look at the systems in which create the perfect storm for hazing and other issues we see in FSL, not the symptomology. I'm not a doctor. So if I see the symptomology, I really can't treat that. Like I'm not like a medical doctor, right? So a medical doctor knows symptomology, they know how to treat. But for us, we need to be able to see the systems in place. What has been built in place to really create these environments? So in FSL, we face things like hazing, retention issues. We face things simply just about behavior of our students, right? Everybody's like, oh, when I was in FSL 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't like that. It just looked different. The system looked different because you grew up in a certain time period or you came through your organization in a certain time period. Oftentimes people are reluctant to address broken systems. They're remiss to address issues or even admit that there are issues. And so for me, I look at like person and environment theory. In social work, we do a lot of mapping. So if we look at the relationship between maybe we have person A who is not really get along with their family, doesn't have that family support. We draw out those ecological maps to really look at where those relationships and those breakdowns in relationships in the systems lie. It's the same thing I do with FSL with groups. We come across groups that are in trouble for hazing or other issues. Where are those? We look at an ecological map of that organization, of the culture of that organization. Where are the systemic breakdowns? What are the areas and perpetuations of policy that are contributing to having these issues happen? Is it that we just have policy that's for the sake of policy and fitting neatly in a box, which we know our FSO students do not fit neatly in the box? We also want to look at conditions and perspectives as to why students are seeking connection, right, through harmful interactions and traditions. So, as a social worker, if I'm servicing someone who maybe is a survivor of interpersonal violence, it's no different than looking at those members who are participating and doing the hazing and ones who are actually going through it, right? Because it's that sense of belonging. And so we know that Maslow's hierarchy needs tells us that a person's sense of belonging is above all else. Food, water, shelter, all of those things. It's no different. So that systemic issue that is you aren't who you want to be, or you'll never be who you want to become if you don't belong to this organization, if you don't belong within this subset peer cultural group within higher education. And so for me, I think about how can I replace those with meaningful and affirming, experiences. And we can do that through policy development. We can do it through crisis response, educational programming. I know there are naysayers out there who say those things don't work. Social work has been doing it since the very beginning of our profession and has worked, right? We are change agents within systems, we're change agents within society. And so I bring that change agency to FSL with my amazing social work background because we study people across the lifespan from birth to death, everything in between. Same with my students. I study them and I think about who they were before they came to higher ed, the K through 12 system, which a lot of hazing is prevalent in K through 12. So I know if they did that to belong there, they're more likely to do it in the higher ed system. And if it exists past higher ed in the workplace, in the military, all of those other places, all of those systems and all of those different environments that really contribute to that student's identity, it's going to happen. And so I'm not here to police behavior or go on harp on accountability as a social worker. I'm really looking at the holistic development of the student and where we can like interrupt that pattern, which is the amazing thing about my profession, what it has taught me over the years.
That's fantastic. Absolutely incredible. Your dissertation is called The Kaleidoscope Effect, a solution-focused approach to hazing prevention. Can you explain to our listeners what that concept means, kaleidoscope effect, and why is that important?
Right. So I know you remember what a kaleidoscope looks
Oh,
like.
yes.
Today's students may be like, what the heck is a
What
kaleidoscope?
is that?
So if you think about a kaleidoscope, right, Michael, you and I can look at the same picture and see two different things.
Mhm.
Neither one of us is wrong, right? It's our lived learned experiences, it's our background that we will see something different. So for me, when I was thinking of a title for my dissertation, I was really wanting to really harp on and push across that students see hazing differently based on their identities, based on their lived experiences and their chapter cultures and their council cultures. So for me, just like a kaleidoscope picture reveals different patterns and how we view them, I really wanted to speak to how students see traditions and may experience trauma in other ways in other people. While we know that hazing is traumatic and it leaves a lot of trauma in the back, right? My concept of my dissertation reminds us that hazing prevention is never and never going to be a one size fits all model. We cannot rubber stamp it. It's not cookie cutter. It just can't exist in that way. So as social workers, we're very solution focused. I often tell my students, I can't do anything about what happened 2 seconds ago, let alone what happened a semester before or when you first became a member. So my dissertation shifts our approach to solely asking what's wrong, which a lot of is what the field has done a lot, is like what's wrong, to what's possible. Right. So I'm no longer concerned with what's wrong. We know the problem. Since 1959, we know we've had so many hazing deaths of students in American higher ed, right? So I'm looking at from my lens of what's possible through the kaleidoscope effect. So I want campuses to begin to shift, and I say it in my dissertation, to ask, what does healthy intake or the new member process actually look like? What is healthy? Right? Because an esteemed alumni's version of healthy and what they went through, or dare I say, a parent who also went through the hazing pledging process, their version of healthy looks different from what we know as professionals is healthy for students. What do students need to feel seen? A lot of students are saying, and they said, and even in the students I interviewed in my study, they did it because they wanted to be a part of the best or the most top ranked organization on campus and feel seen. So now that's a question we need to ask. What do they need to feel seen, celebrated, and challenged? Students participate in hazing because they want to be seen, they want to be celebrated, and they want to be challenged. So how can we do that in a healthy manner without them being harmed? And then also, the framework that I talk about in my dissertation from the Kaleidoscope Effect really looks at adaptive identity in a aware student-led environment, because us as practitioners, our influence is never going to be as strong as that peer influence. So how do we help them see the picture and understand from a healthier model in a student-led way what healthy new member education or intake looks like? And then it helps us move beyond those rigid narratives towards like multifaceted, those researchers who are like, oh, if we just throw 1,000 programs in there, if we take all the programs away, it'll fix it. Well, we both know that that's not possible. So it really sought to look at meaningful solutions that reflect really on the true complexity of hazing in higher education and what that looks like, and the fact that hazing predates higher education. So this isn't something that just happened overnight. We are fighting a generational, like multi-generational issue of students who really, if you boil it down, like I said, to its finest, they want to be seen, they want to be celebrated, and they want to be challenged. And in order to achieve those three things, students believe in their mindset now and are systemically being taught that you have to put yourself at risk in order to earn the respect that comes along with that.
Mm. Your background in social work, I think, contributes to one of the key ideas in your dissertation, which is replacement activities in our efforts for hazing prevention. Can you share some examples of what that actually looks like in practice? Because there are people right now that are questioning the value of replacement activities, and they are dismissing all of them as ice cream socials.
So one thing, I mean, if nothing else, I shoot straight from the hip. Let's be clear. Replacement activities are not cupcakes and kumbaya sessions. And that's not what I'm proposing. And the naysayers, that's how they approach it. It's like, oh, it's just fun and cupcakes and kumbaya sessions. I never said that in my dissertation. You can read it and see. And we are not saying that as the practitioners who believe in replacement activities. When done well and they're culturally grounded, when I say culturally, what is the culture of that chapter / national organization? We know there's been a cultural history of hazing in many of our organizations and many of our chapters. So when done well with meaningful rituals, right? The big R, right? To meet the same needs hazing claims to address. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not just saying like, when my daughter was little and she was playing with something I didn't want her to play with, I didn't just take what I didn't want her to play with away and give her nothing, because she would crawl right back to that thing. That's the same with our students. I'm not just taking it away and say, oh, no, 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 honey, I want to put hazing over here. I don't want you to play with it. I don't want you to do it. No, I'm seeking to really addressing because the current things we have claim to address bonding, trust, resilience, shared identity. So an example I gave in my dissertation was a chapter might replace a harmful scavenger hunt, right? Where unfortunately one of the pledges has fallen in the woods, or one of the new members has fallen in the woods and broken an ankle or gotten hurt, with a values-based team challenge designed with alumni in mind, right? With advisors, with current chapter members. We're not saying don't do the night scavenger hunt after we've had 10 beers in the basement of the frat house or what have you. What we're saying is, how can we do a values-based challenge? So, here are the clues to figuring out what each of our founders have contributed. So we have 12 founders of our organization. Here are the clues. And in order to do that, these men of standard who are already part of our org, our alumni, are going to teach you these things along with your current big brothers in this process. So we're not just taking it away, but we're creating an environment, right, that really helps them. Facilitated storytelling. Alumni love to sit back and talk about themselves, right? They want to have these special nights where, oh, we just want to meet with the men and tell them about our legacy. Okay, well, if we're going to do that, let's do a storytelling circle, right? Where members share personal journeys and cultural traditions the right way. One organization can use a heritage immersion. Some organizations have started to actually move to heritage immersion weekends, where, it's like kind of like that overnight brotherhood camping trip, but it's rooted in, okay, how do we immerse our members in their heritage of this chapter, of this organization, so they understand the legacy that they're standing upon and what they're coming into. It can deepen brotherhood and sisterhood connections with new members and legacy. And then you carry on the legacy of your founders, not just your founders, but your founding fathers or founding mothers of your particular chapter, right? It really is about being intentional when we're doing these programmings. Replacement doesn't mean soft. In my mind, it means smarter. So we're not, this thing, even in the NPHC world, we have this ideology of paper versus made. So if you go through, I'm a member of Delta, very proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And I can say to a fact, I was not hazed when I came through Delta. I was not going to allow myself to be hazed because I knew my rights. That's another thing. Having new members know what's expected of them and their rights. Even in my chapter 5, I talk about many different activities that can replace. So when folks are like, oh, it doesn't work, have you tried it, right? For them, it's like, oh, it was done to me. We've been doing it for years. It's always been done this way. But that doesn't make it right? It's not that students are soft, or in the MPHC, MGC world, they're not paper. Because whether you beat the hell out of me or whether I came in and just did all the things right, we still wear the same letters. We still pay the same amount of membership fees. Only thing is, you have either physical or emotional scars that you're got to deal with, that you're now perpetuating and passing on generational violence to the next generation. And then you get upset when popular culture and media and society says our orgs can't be trusted. Or when you're working in FSL and parents are like, I would never let my kid join. Several people's children have died. Of course, I want to hold my child near and dear. There's all a myriad of things that are dangerous in college, and being a part or joining a brotherhood or sisterhood shouldn't be one of them. So I'm for the smarter approach. And for those naysayers who say that this doesn't work, show me your proof that it doesn't work. I have research that says it does. You don't. You just have your opinion that says, oh, this doesn't work. Have you tried to see if it works yet? More likely than not, no, because I've searched and there's no research out there that says that their approach works better than the one we're proposing.
Fantastic. That's an incredible answer. And clearly, you've demonstrated that we can have these rites of passage without mental and physical abuse. It's very clear that we can do that. And I think that's our job, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're here for, is to propose some of those ideas. You studied some of the differences in attitudes between IFC and Panhellenic members regarding hazing. I'm wondering what surprised you the most in your findings?
So the quantitative findings weren't surprising at all. I knew going in, looking at the data, that Panhellenic was more likely than not going to be on the up and up numbers wise when answering a survey. It's almost like you have to beware of bias that the students are answering the way you think they're supposed to answer, the way they think you want them to answer. Same with IFC. But when it came to my interviews and my focus groups with the students, that's where it became interesting. So IFC and Panhellenic really did interpret and internalize hazing as a concept of tradition. They both looked at it and saw it as a tradition. But from the Panhellenic models, women thought that tradition should be flexible, somewhat flexible, something that could evolve over time, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that we haze these members, but it's fluid. It can change depending on the semester, depending on the region. It could change. But from IFC, many men thought of tradition almost as sacred, is how they described it in the interviews, deeply tied to legacy, image, and status, which we know are dangerous when interpreted the wrong way, right? I got to keep up appearances as the hardest fraternity to get into that does X, Y, and Z hazing rituals. So if one group is on top one year and then they're no longer on top, doc, they're going to up the ante for that next pledge class. And now we're getting into dangerous territory. The rigid attachment that the IFC men made it harder for them to see certain behaviors as problematic. I remember one particular IFC man, when I asked him if he had hazed or ever been hazed, he said yes to both. And it shocked me because I had at that point interviewed maybe 30 students and no one had ever admitted to it, either witnessing it. And he described a process called bows and caps, where they lean on the bottle caps. You got to fill them with blood, the whole gory thing. But the way he described it was almost euphoric for him as his amazing rite of passage, that I deserve to wear these letters now. And I countered him by saying, did you pay your initiation fees? He said, yes. Did you pass all your tests? Yeah. So what was this extra? How are you different from your pledge brothers who did not participate? Because one thing was evident was like he described his pledge class being very split as well, because not everybody participated in the hazing nights. Some of them chose not to, but also they are not revered as true brothers or members. While they are dues paying members of that particular chapter at that particular university, they are not as well respected. And it is shown outwardly how the brothers treat them across campus. Whereas Panhellenic members, on the other hand, they identified non-physical forms of hazing, the servitude. Mm-hmm. But when challenged, like emotional manipulation, social isolation, like you can't, if you live in this dorm, you can't talk to any of your friends, or the emotional, like, being the mean girl, kind of being like the jerk clause, essentially. They also expressed stronger willingness to intervene when hazing was suspected or observed. But interesting enough, despite their willingness, because in the quantitative data, they said that they would intervene. They would intervene. But when interviewed, they talked about and admitted that they had heard of hazing occurring. They kind of knew when you saw the kid dressed as the toucan and the tree on campus, what that meant, what the backpack, the kid, the weather kid, right? What all of these things meant, or being pledge mothers, right? And we often think our women don't participate in some of those nights, and they are there. They are participating, but they saw it as, while they understood reporting was the right thing to do, they were also had this unrealistic thing of social gatekeepers. Because if you think about how FSL is designed, especially from the Panhellenic standpoint, women don't really have the space and place to have these socials. The men are the keepers of their social life. So if I know your chapter is hazing and I report you, there goes our social life. It was really prevalent at James Madison University, and it's unique to understand that at JMU, they don't have a local bar scene. Like at a West Virginia U, right down from High Street, where some fraternities are, is all of the bar scene. Mm-hmm. So there's somewhere for students and groups to go. But there at a school like JMU, where all of the social scene is on campus, and if the fraternities get in trouble for hazing and they go away, there goes our social life. So they're willing to sacrifice and maintain the status that if the chapters are tough on their pledges or if they are hazing, then it's a status climb. And for some of the sororities that women I talked to was like, you want to social with those with high status. You get high status by engaging in these dangerous, aggressive behaviors, but I'm not willing to report it. So in essence, while they're not doing the more of what we call dangerous hazing, the life ending hazing, they are perpetuating and reinforcing the cycle by not reporting and knowing that things are happening. It's not just rumors that they hear, right? They know these things have happened. They've witnessed in some essence of some of these things, but they really weren't willing to give up that social atmosphere. And that was shocking to me. It's like interesting because the study even asked about like dangerous behavior such as drinking and sexual assault. And it's like, well, if you know some of these chapters are predatory, why are you socializing with them? No one is making you. Well, but they're still the top chapter on campus. So it's almost interesting how they know that it's wrong and that there are issues, but just like in a victim mentality, we can help an intimate partner violence victim over and over and over again, but they're going to have to decide to break the cycle and walk away. What does that look like for them when that's the environment that's happening? So it was really fascinating to hear that from the students.
Yeah, that is absolutely fascinating. Incredible. I'm thinking about the recent hazing case with Kappa Alpha Psi at Mercer. A lot of the national hazing conversation today, it just seems like it's so focused on predominantly white fraternities and sororities. I'm wondering from your perspective, why do you feel like it is essential that NPHC and MGC organizations are equally a part of this hazing prevention conversation?
So we know that hazing doesn't discriminate. It's no respecter of persons. So it's not like it only happens to affluent chapters or chapters with a certain historical background and identity. It happens across the board. It looks different across the board. And so neither should prevention efforts. But if you look at it, like a lot of how the prevention models and the prevention curriculums are built, they're built with those who have the influence and the money to pay for them and the power to say so in them. So this is why I believe that we're seeing a lot of it geared towards our IFC and Panhellenic groups because per capita, they have significantly more financial influence than especially your MGC groups. While in PHA, we have our influence. We do not have the historical because they are much older than us. Many of our orgs exist at predominantly white institutions, while we have many historically Black letter institutions, Black fraternities and sororities at historically Black universities and colleges. Historically Black college universities traditionally don't have that level of influence on the political level, on the social level. We don't have that buying, that economic power that IFC and Panhellenic have had for eons and generations. Remember, my orgs like mine were founded because we could not go to their schools. We could not gain membership into their societies. It's not like we just wanted to be separate. We had to do it out of survival, but also for us to be able to have something for ourselves. So when we look at those headlines, I want people to know that hazing and MGC and MPHG groups are really rooted deep in culture, pride, secrecy, and intergenerational trauma, and the desire to protect the legacy. It's almost like in a Black household, what happens in this house stays in this house. We don't tell the pastor about it. We don't tell our teachers. You don't go out and tell my business. When I talk about the intergenerational trauma, there's a research, and I can't remember their name right now. They liken the hazing and MGC and MPT orgs to post-traumatic slavery syndrome. So for whatever reason, we feel like the best way to break or to make a member is through physical violence. Because if you notice, most hazing deaths you see among the culturally based Greek organizations have to do with some type of beating or physical injury that's happened. It's very rare that you will see one due to drugs and alcohol, or you might see a drowning because they were testing the gauntlet and you got to swim this far, whatever have you. And so it's almost like their stories don't go viral, which means harm isn't happening and members don't need to be supported when we think about it from that way. You had the hazing death of some of the students in IFC and other areas, and those stories go viral. Caleb Wilson is a little different, right? I think because Max Grover's law exists, and because Southern is like one of those well-known historically Black college universities, that's why. But also, I think because of the positionality we have with social media, now that is also why. Because he is not the first. Like a lot of people are like, well, they never really have any deaths. Oh, lies. Let's go back and look at history. They definitely, MPHC groups definitely do. Um, what's interesting is like MGC and MPC groups also participate in what we call this respectability politicking of it all when it comes to new member education or intake. So we look at traditions of respectability, exclusivity, and to proving one's worth. So even if you know the hazing is wrong, you're not going to speak of it. Because even look at the MPC cases, you don't just have current students involved. You have alumni,
Yeah.
university administrators who happen to be members of those organizations being
Mhm.
named. And they're just not being named because they happen to have been a bystander. They were more than likely probably involved because traditionally, right, this exclusivity. The movie Burning Sands depicts a really good in the scene where the student goes to the dean who is a member of the organization in the movie he's trying to join. He was like, oh, well, it's almost over, only for it to end with the student dying later. This is the dean in this movie of that university who knows who's a member. So it's not like we don't know our own culture. And so that's why it's important for researchers to really look at. I know in my dissertation, I did not mention MGC or MPHC groups. And the reason why I did not is because all of those schools were at big, predominantly white institutions, and their communities were so small. There was really no way as a researcher for me to protect their identity and what they told me in those interviews. We did interview students from all of those different councils, from MGC, from MPHC, but when I realized that there's only 2 MGC chapters on this campus, there's only 3 MPHC chapters, based off of their tradition and what they're known for, because we have very distinct identities. You know a Delta, you know an AK, you know a Kappa, based off of our social identities, our rituals, our traditions. I never wanted for students to suffer for the decisions they had made prior to the study because I put them in there, because it would have been very easy, especially like LSU, Penn State, to be able to tell which chapter answered which ways. And there's no statute of limitations. Mm-hmm. So what's to say someone couldn't have backed up and charged those chapters? And, are the members who participated back then even still at the school? So it was a difficult decision to make, but it was an important one because, and I think that's why a lot of researchers also don't include them. Plus, MPHC and MGC orgs are very tight knit. They keep their things very internal, very private. And I don't know if their national organizations are ready to really do a true climate survey and really climate research to look at how much hazing is actually happening within the chapters at both the grad level and the undergraduate level. And that's another unique causicism, that we can join at the graduate level. We don't have to be undergraduate students to join those organizations. So our advisors involved, our alumni, university administrators, right? So it has a lot of unknowns. So I think that's why like a lot of the hazing prevention research does not, because once you get below the surface, you see all that it involves. Are the orgs willing to even open up to talk about these things and to really admit some of the ugly truths that are there below the surface? Right now, I don't think they are, because even with the most recent Kappa Alpha Psi case, the Omega case with Caleb, you read the articles and it's very like, it's real sketchy. Like, what do you mean you weren't available for comment? Or if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, smells like a duck, it's a duck. And it's like, oh, maybe the advisor wasn't involved. There's too much detail here to say that advisor wasn't involved or didn't know something about what was happening. That happens to also be the cheerleading coach, like in the Mercer case of the institution. Interesting, right? Who now no longer, out of the blue, no longer works there.
Right. Or an alumnus who owns the place where the hazing was happening in the case of Caleb.
Yes, and I didn't know. I just leave my building open at nighttime.
Right. It's just free for anybody to use.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, really? Yeah, I agree. It seems very sketchy to me. I'm also interested in your take on this because hazing has been happening in higher ed since the 1600s at Harvard. And we know it's been happening every year since 1959, from what we've seen from Hank Newer. So, what are some of the institutional barriers that you found that make it difficult for campuses to address these hazing cases effectively?
I think the biggest barrier is fragmentation. So everyone's responsible, but no one's truly accountable when you think about it. I think back to some of the cases I've studied, even what happened at Western University with Nolan Birch. Prevention oftentimes is really siloed if we look at it. Student conduct has one piece of it, right? So they're over here. Student engagement or FSL has another. And then you have university legal, which is totally separate and apart from student conduct. And then there's no coordinated strategy or effort when we start talking about prevention. Everybody's kind of have their own piece, but no one's talking to each other. Everybody's communicating, but just with each other. And then prevention becomes reactive. So instead of proactive, right? Because in some cases, I think a lot of institutions feel like if we are proactive, then we have some ownership and something happens on our campus. And that's not necessarily true. We cannot control the behaviors of our students. We can only provide them with the information and then hope and trust that they're going to make proper decisions. Another issue really bigly is fear and fear of liability, right? Fear of losing chapters, not just losing them in terms of suspension or expulsion, but especially with IFC, in a hot minute, they will pick up their toy boxes, their toys, and go play in another toy box, sandbox. They will create an independent IFC out of nowhere, right? And then that begs the question, what onus now does NIC have on really regulating what happens when those members or those member chapters decide to go, or national headquarters? Because I've seen in my experience, there are some groups where national headquarters have encouraged them to not play ball with the university, to not be a part of the community. Well, they won't let us have first semester freshmen. We just won't be a part. We'll do our own thing. That doesn't really work because you're not getting any prevention, you're not getting any education. And also fear of community backlash. I think a lot of institutions fear what the community will really think and say, especially parents, because students mean butts and seats mean dollars. Mm-hmm. And so if we talk about these issues, if we do major preventative efforts, if we're less reactive and more proactive, is that going to cut into our bottom line? And so in essence, this fear often leads to a watered down and performative trainings. Those check the box trainings that you and I both know we just do not like. Also, lastly, a lot of times there's a lack of funding for prevention infrastructure. And people are like, but they do all this Title IX prevention. Remember, Cleary is now having to recognize hazing as a Cleary crime on campus as of December 2024, when Biden signed it into office. Before that, it was separate and apart. Well, we know that a lot of hazing involves Cleary crimes, but because it's hazing, the Title IX office can't touch it. And student conduct, they are fact gatherers, not finders. They're not true like detectives. So they can only go off what's being known. And so you can't really honestly build, institutions can't build a culture of safety without investing in people, programs, policy enforcement, especially at the FSL level. They have got to stop having FSL offices of 2 people.
Amen.
But you got 5,500 kids in the community. There is no way that daycares don't even operate on that kind of ratio. Like, it's illegal for schools to operate. So you expect an office of 2. Sometimes, if you're lucky, 4, and the other 2 are actual full-time staff, and the other ones are grads. But you want me to do prevention. You want me to regulate socials. You want me to do all this programming curriculum. And then when I find a good curriculum like Greek University I want to bring in, the dean has the nerve to tell me, oh, we can't afford it. You just told me to be preventative with the students, and I bring a program to you, we'll find something else or do it yourself. But I'm not the end all be all. I may not be the expert in this subject matter. My students need to hear. So in one sentence, you're telling us we got to do this prevention, especially with the Stop Campus Hazing Act, right? Universities are scrambling. Yeah. But what they're not scrambling to do is redo them budgets in dollars and cents so that FSL offices and whoever is who's in charge of FSL has the actual capital to be able to be proactive instead of reactive. And that, again, that funding, like we've got to stop it having, and not even just having offices of two. You want somebody to have a master's or a doctor and be the director, but you only want to pay them 50,000 a year. This is a very highly vulnerable student population.
Yeah.
If you want people who can be experts in the matter and do the work, you've got to pay them their worth, but you've also got to provide them with the resources. The same way you resource your Title IX office because there's a federal mandate to do it, is the same way you should be resourcing your FSL offices. Because while there is not a true federal mandate for us to do it, we can't do the work. We can't have meaningful impact and change without it, not
Right.
at the institutional level.
Right. And also, let's take a look at athletics too, as well, and the resources
Yes,
that
and
are being
stop
spent
blaming
there.
FSL for everything and look at student government, club sports, the band,
Sure. Yeah, I
the
mean,
marching
hazing exists
band.
within athletics too. Why aren't they at the table and also contributing? Why is it just an FSL problem? And why do we assume that you must be the expert if you're sitting in that seat, right? It's all of these assumptions here, and it seems like FSL is just tasked with that for everybody. So fascinating, and I think it kind of contributes to the next question, which is if we're not paying our FSL directors enough, we're paying them $50,000 and we expect them to have a master's degree in higher ed, perhaps a doctorate, it just creates turnover. This person ends up leaving for the private sector where they can double their salary. So,
Yeah.
knowing the high turnover in these FSL roles, I'm wondering from your perspective, how can the campus build institutional memory and long-term hazing prevention efforts that actually stick?
One of the things is we have to document everything. There's nothing worse than coming into a new role in FSL in any institution, and there's nothing. There's no data. Ain't no rosters. Let's start there. Like you don't even know who's in your community.
Mm.
Not just policies, but relationships, traditions, successful programs, lessons learned. It baffles me that we as institutions have this disconnect with our alumni who were FSL members at one point, who more for good, bad, ugly, or otherwise have helped contribute to the current climate we're dealing with our current students, because they didn't just come up with it on their own. Like this just didn't pop into their head. For me, institutional memory isn't just about paperwork, it's about preserving the culture, context, and continuity of prevention efforts. It has to become that and be that important. Creating intentional onboarding protocols, right? Not just for new staff, but also for student leaders. Why are we expecting and trusting that these 18, 19, 20-year-olds are actually transitioning officer roles properly? And not just be like, oh, I'm over it, I'm graduating, I'm leaving.
Yeah,
But
they're
you
not
didn't
doing it.
transition the bank account, none of the paperwork has been filled out, anything like that, right? Students often outlast professionals in these roles, and we know that. Students will probably be here longer than some of us with a high turnover rate. So why aren't we equipping them with the knowledge and tools to carry their torches? Again, not replacing FSL staff, but how are we building them to capacity so that they can also be understanding in these matters? Also, don't be afraid to co-labor, or as we know, the word is called collaboration, but I like to say co-labor across departments, okay? And engage in longstanding campus professional relationships with faculty as well. The faculty actually see the students much more than we do. So why aren't we educating our faculty on what hazing looks like, or how can we look at the business college model and help with, because if you think about it, our students are running many corporations. These are many businesses they're running. So why aren't we using our business colleges, our schools of social work to talk about person and environment and human relationships? We're sitting here saying, oh, our students need mental health like services and resource. You got a whole counseling center on your campus and none of your students have ever stepped foot into it. You as a staff have never even gone over there to really see, or it's never been encouraged to really do it across barriers. Also, really looking at the institution's strategic plan. It's really telling if with the strategic plan of a division and things, if hazing prevention is not embedded in that. We got a whole section for Title IX and all that prevention. The hazing prevention is not mentioned once. Oftentimes, I liken hazing prevention to the redheaded stepchild. Everybody knows it exists, but nobody wants to talk about it until it becomes a problem. And then
Mhm,
by then it's too late. Um, Also, we really need to have prevention be a part of the culture, not just compliance. This
mhm.
is a cultural shift, a cultural change, not just a compliance piece where we check the box. I think we're more likely to survive the extreme turnover we're seeing when we become, as FSL, in our prevention efforts and our needs, a part of the institutional's DNA. Because we do retain our students at a higher rate at most institutions than any other division. We matriculate them through 4 years of 4 years of college.
That's right.
Um, we have also institutions have to stop looking at us as just crisis response or a passion project for one professional. While I love my students and I got into this to do all the right things by them, and it was an amazing opportunity for me as a social worker to marry my skills with the development of my students. I'm not a monolith. I even in my introduction here as director of FSL at USF, I told the alumni, the staff, the students, and the advisors I met, I'm not going to be siloed and I will not do this work alone. We are going to co-labor together. We share a good thing, but also institutions have to recognize you just can't keep us over in the back corners of campus and then get upset and be like, why is everything going wrong? You didn't provide any resources, any supports. You only bring us out when you want us to make you look good. But the moment something goes wrong, oh, we're the problem child. Perhaps because we're starved for affection and resources. And so that's why we have those issues. And that's also why you lose really good staff
Yep.
and high turnover because they get so burnt out, they get so bogged down that it becomes, I'm not even making a difference, and it becomes unhealthy for them.
Hmm, hmm. All really, really good points, and something that we need to consider all across the country. I'm wondering, as the new director of fraternity and sorority life at the University of South Florida, talk to us about your initial priorities and your goals for this upcoming year.
I have a lot of those, which have probably driven my students crazy. So my overall personal theme is being rooted in purpose, right? So what is the purpose and intentionality of FSL? What legacy we really want to lead? My first priority day one was to just listen. I've been on this listening tour for 2 months with advisors, with faculty, with staff, with students, with alumni, um, and different partners from around campus, and my critics as well, those who would wish to see us go away. So I'm a firm believer in narratives, but being careful of the single narrative. So I want to get the holistic narrative picture from everybody. So I wanted to understand their stories, their struggles, and their strengths that define this community. The great thing I love about this new community is they're very young.
Hmm.
Now, they were founded in 1967. So they're not even 70 years old yet. There's so much potential for growth for their great abilities. From there, we're going to begin to focus in 3 sector areas: building shared leadership and identity across councils. So no more just IFC and Panhellenic working together, but we have 4 councils: MGC, IFC, Panhellenic, and MPHC. Really building that cross-council identity and really learning about each other. Enhancing compliance and education around hazing and interpersonal harm. Luckily, this institution has not had a lot of issues with hazing, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen if we don't educate. And then elevating their cultural relevance through their values-based programming. So really, why is FSL relevant at this day and age when most schools have 800 plus student orgs that students can join? What is the philanthropic factor? What is the service factor that those scholastic achievement academics? My overall goal is really to create clarity for the students, consistency and care, and to really, alongside the students, build something that they can be proud of to be a part of years later when they come back as alumni. Really, what was their lasting impact and legacy for this area?
Fantastic. I wish you all the success in the world. I know the students there at the University of South Florida are very fortunate to have you to champion for them. So thank you for all of that. If our listeners, if they want to connect with you about your research, or maybe they want to partner with you for future research, where can they go to connect with you?
So they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Akeya Simeon, PhD on LinkedIn because we gotta put that doctorate there. We earned it.
Yes.
My Instagram, Simeon underscore PhD as well. They can always private message me or they can email me at Akeya Simeon at gmail.com. They're more than welcome. I'm a researcher at heart. I'm very inquisitive. So, if it's a speaker you need, or, just to shop talk and talk about your community and ways to, how interesting if you found me being a social worker interesting and how I look at things systemically. Like, I'm always willing to help colleagues because I want FSL to be around when my daughter is able to go through her new member process, which will be fall 2035 when she's 8 years old. So fall
Get ready.
2025. But hey, if things keep going the way they're going, we may not have FSL by the time
That's
my
very
daughter.
depressing for me to think about. I don't want to think about that.
Yeah.
I just want to think about the good work that you're doing to ensure that she has that opportunity that we've all been given as a gift. And I hope that she gets that one day as well. I know that she will, as long as you keep doing the work. So, Dr. Akeya Simeon, let me tell you, you are a rock star. I'm honored to know you and to be your friend, and hopefully do some research together in the near future. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. You and I could talk for hours, but we'll cut it off here and just say we'll keep something for next time. So thank you for all the work that you do. I appreciate you.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure, and I had a great time.
Of course. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Akeya Simeon, I want you to like it and I want you to share it with other students that are also interested in hazing prevention on their college campus. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Bye for now.